is he? Why is he here? Isolated in space on a round mass of matter live some several billion intelligent beings. Man. But what is his origin? Some say he evolved from the slime of the sea. Others that a god created an Adam and Eve and he was their descendant. Yet another speculates that he was brought here sometime in the distant past when the Earth was colonized by men from another dying planet. Despite the theories and speculations, the answer remains an unsolved mystery. As to where he is, that's easier. A planet 8,000 miles in diameter, located in a remote portion of a galaxy, somewhere in infinite space. Why is he here? That too remains an unsolved mystery. Occupied by his daily affairs, he finds little time to contemplate such questions, except for those moments on a clear night when man pauses and looks to the star-filled heavens, and in his mind stirs an unanswered question. He searches his thoughts for an explanation, a key to the faint, forgotten memory of his past. And perhaps at that moment, somewhere else in the universe, on a distant planet similar to his own, somewhere on the other side of our galaxy, other intelligent beings wondered too, and set out in airships on an adventure through space to search for their answers.
November 2nd, 1967. Two men are driving west of Loveland, Texas. The night is clear and still. Then around 11 p.m., they have an extraordinary experience.
Come on, let's get out and check it.
After the object disappears, their lights come back on. The engine restarts, and they hurry to notify the police. Later, the Air Force investigates their story and 15 similar reports before concluding that a form of globular lightning was responsible for the sightings. But there are many other possible explanations. What you're witnessing is based on fact. Some will find it fascinating. Some may find it frightening. But it is all true. With special thanks to NASA and the Department of Defense for their cooperation in our search for UFOs. It has begun.
The Old Testament, Ezekiel chapter 1. It came to pass that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. Out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures. They had the likeness of man. Now, as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel upon the earth by the living creatures. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color beryl, and their appearance and their work was, as it were, a wheel in the middle of a wheel. And when they went upon their four sides, and they turned not when they went. As for their rings, they were so high, they were dreadful, and their rings were full of eyes, round about them four. And when the living creatures were, the wheels went by them. And when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels lifted up.
This account took place some 500 years before Christ. Other accounts very similar appear in earlier ancient writings. The Greeks and Romans also are known to have made observations of such things as phantom chariots appearing in the night sky. Records also tell us that during the reign of Charlemagne, there were many accounts of encounters with tyrants of the air and their aerial ships. These accounts so concerned Charlemagne that those reporting such strange phenomena were subject to torture and death. Here is one recorded event given between the 8th and 9th century in France.
One day, among other instances, it chanced at Lyon that 3 men and a woman were seen descending from these aerial ships. The entire city gathered about them, saying that they were magicians sent by Charlemagne's enemy to destroy the French harvest. In vain, the 4 innocents sought to vindicate themselves, saying that they were their own country folk and had been carried away a short time since by miraculous men who had shown them unheard of marvels. Luckily, the Bishop of Lyon pronounced the incident as false, saying it was not true these men had fallen from the sky, and what the townfolk said they had seen there was impossible. The people believed what their good bishop said rather than their own eyes, and set at liberty the 4 ambassadors from the ship.
The date was November 12th, the year 1887. The time was near midnight aboard the sailing ship Siberian, when it was reported that several people aboard ship witnessed a huge sphere of fire. It was observed arising out of the ocean. It rose to an altitude of 16 meters, then flew against the wind and came close to the ship, then dashed off toward the southeast. This sighting lasted a full 5 minutes.
Within the years 1896 and 97, mysterious airships were reported all across the United States. In Oakland, California, a group of streetcar passengers reported a winged cigar that sent out a stream of bright light. The sighting spread through Colorado, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and many other states, particularly in the Midwest. On April 11, 1897, Walter McCann of Rogers Park, a few miles north of Chicago, took a photograph of an airship. The New York Herald, as well as the Chicago Herald Tribune, pronounced the plates as being genuine and not a fake.
Dr. Jacques Vallée, international authority on the UFO experience.
The first thing I'd like to dispel is a frequent misconception that UFOs are limited to this country. Very often people ask me, how come I never hear about UFOs in other parts of the world? How come we only hear about UFOs in America? Well, UFOs are not an American phenomenon. They are a worldwide phenomenon. That's one of their most dramatic characteristics. The first major wave of sightings, and sightings tend to come in very intense series over a couple of months, over a given region of the world. The first such major wave occurred over Scandinavia in 1946. There was a major wave in this country in 1947, mainly in the western states. And then there have been waves in the US in 1950, 1952, and so on. And there have been intense concentrations of sightings in Africa, in Latin America, in Mexico, in the Soviet Union, in the People's Republic of China, Australia, New Zealand, and on and on and on. I don't know of any single country that has not had a series of UFO sightings. May 1975, Manitoba, Canada. Unidentified flying objects have been reported over the small town of Carmen. The objects have been seen by many witnesses over a period of several weeks. May 13th, 1975, cameraman Alan Carr of station CKY in Manitoba photographs 2 separate sightings over Carmen in front of 4 witnesses. The first sighting occurs at approximately 10:30 p.m. The object appears to be stationary just above the ground. Then, almost simultaneous with a flash which appears in the sky, the object moves north at blinding speed. Only when the film is later analyzed in slow motion does Carr realize what he has captured photographically. Approximately an hour later, a second sighting occurs. The object appears over a group of trees and moves from left to right at an apparently low relative altitude to the horizon. Again, slow motion analysis provides a fascinating study of this unexplained event.
On June 30th, 1973, Jean Bigot of the Astrophysical Institute flew over Chad aboard the Concorde, packed full of scientists and scientific apparatus, at 17,000 meters altitude. In the twilight of a total eclipse, Mr. Bigot photographed the horizon with his camera. When the photo was enlarged, one of the slides showed what you're now seeing. If you look closely at this photograph, it resembles exactly what has been cited by many Americans during 1973 and 74. Although NASA takes no official position as to the UFO phenomena and their probable explanation, nevertheless, there remains on the record several unexplainable sightings by Gemini, Apollo, and Skylab astronauts. The first sighting occurred during Gemini 4 in June of 1965. Astronaut Jim McDivitt suddenly spotted a cylindrical object with arms and antenna. And when seen against the day sky, it appeared white or silvery. The object then appeared to be moving toward the craft. Suddenly, they lost sight of it. During the sighting, the astronauts were able to take these photographs and movie films of the UFO. Gemini 5, later that year, after 3 days and 5 hours into their mission, were contacted by Houston Control Center, advising the astronauts that Houston had picked up and was tracking another object, which was pacing Gemini across the entire United States. They estimated the UFO between 2,000 to 10,000 yards from the craft, and as large as the Gemini craft itself. Because of the limitations of viewing area aboard their capsule, no visual contact was made. Radar continued to track the object until they passed the Ascension Islands in the Atlantic. It then disappeared. Gemini 10 crew, Collins and Young, picked up objects traveling together in orbit. A positive identification has, to date, not been made. This photo was taken during the Gemini 11 flight on the 18th revolution, 27 hours and 47 minutes after liftoff. September 13th, 1966. This UFO was tracked visually and recorded on film by the crew, and is truly considered unidentified by the photo interpretation experts at NASA. Perhaps the strongest and most spectacular of all the sightings took place aboard Apollo 11 on its way to the moon for the first moon landing. The ship was 1 day out, on July 16, 1969, when they spotted an unusual object. It had a sizable dimension to it. At first, the crew thought it was the Saturn IV booster rocket and called Houston for confirmation. Houston informed them the booster in question was some 6,000 miles away. The object remains unknown. During the Skylab 3 second manned flight, on the 23rd day of 1973, at sunrise, a series of 4 exposures were made by the crew of a visually sighted unidentified flying object, or satellite, as considered by the NASA Photo Interpretation Laboratory. The Skylab crew noticed a large star-shaped object, brighter than a planet or star. They watched it for about 10 minutes. They estimated its distance as from 30 to 50 nautical miles from Skylab. It, too, remains an unknown, despite North American air defense and NASA's attempt to identify it. Among the thousands of military men in recent times who lost their lives while in the service of their country, the circumstances surrounding Captain Mantell's death are indeed extraordinary. This experienced military pilot who'd flown in the invasion in Normandy and numerous missions over the Rhine under heavy attack would take with him to his death perhaps the closest glimpse of what was thought to be a UFO.
The date is January the 7th, 1948. The time is 2 o'clock in the afternoon here at the Godman Air Force Base, just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. A Kentucky state policeman calls in to report what he has sighted.
It's an unusual aircraft, circular in appearance, approximately 250 to 300 feet in diameter. I'd say it's moving westwardly at a pretty good clip. Any information?
Negative. I will check with our commanding officer.
Instructions were given to contact nearby Wright-Patterson Air Base to see if they had any experimental aircraft up in that area.
Flight test. We have no experimental aircraft in the area.
The reports still continued to come in from adjoining towns. At 1:45 p.m., it happens.
It's very white and looks like an umbrella. I don't know what it is. Through the binocs, it appears to have a red border at the bottom at times and a red border at the top at times. At approximately 2:30 p.m., a flight of Air Force P-51s come into view. The base commander decides to contact the flight leader, Captain Mantell.
This is Godman Base Commander.
Roger, Godman Tower. This is NG-869, flight leader. Over.
NG-869 from Godman Tower. We have an object out south of Godman here that we were unable to identify. We'd like you to take a look for us.
Roger, I will take a look for you if you give me the correct reading.
Mantell moves ahead of his wingman. The tower advises the flight leader to correct his course 5 degrees to the left to 210 degrees from Godman Tower.
Godman Tower, this is flight leader NG-869, Captain Mantell. Object traveling at half my speed and directly ahead of me and above, and I'm closing in to take a good look.
Can you give us a description?
It appears metallic and to be of tremendous size. I'm going to 20,000 feet.
The other pilots level off under 15,000 feet and start down. At approximately 3:15 p.m., Godman Tower loses sight of the UFO.
5 minutes later, the report came in that Captain Mantell's plane had crashed. He was found dead. His watch had stopped at 3:10 p.m. that afternoon. What was it that caused this experienced pilot to become intrigued with an object that he would unwittingly give his life pursuing?
6 months later, a cylindrical-shaped object giving off a phosphorescent glow was to be sighted in the night sky over Robbins Air Force Base in Georgia. At 2:45 a.m., Captain C.S. Childs and First Officer J.B. Whitted were piloting a routine Eastern Airlines flight number 576 from Houston to Atlanta. When Whitted reports, we sighted an object coming toward us. This strange object had a stream of red fire coming from its tail, and I could see it was much larger than anything I had seen or read about. Childs then notices that the object had no wings supporting it. It passed us on the right side. Its speed was about 700 miles per hour. And both men get a very good look at this unusual object. It was about 100 feet long, shaped like a cigar. As it passed, they clearly saw 2 rows of windows, an upper and lower, that were large and square. During that evening, there was a third witness, the one passenger who was awake on that Eastern Airlines flight, Clarence McKelvey.
I was startled, frightened. A male steward came to me and said, "I notice you've been looking out the window. Will you talk to the pilot?" And I said, "Well, of course." The pilot came down with his clipboard. He was visibly shaken. He told me that he had been a flyer in the war and had covered so many million miles of flight and had never seen anything like this before. What was it that I saw? Well, I saw this object. It was cigar-shaped. It had a row of windows. Behind them, it was lit. Out of the rear was a cherry red flame.
This hair-raising experience was witnessed by 3 aircraft, a passenger, and ground observers added more corroboration. The conclusion of an air intelligence report was that the object remains unidentified as to origin, construction, and power source, and goes into the record classified as unknown. This is the Pentagon, Washington, D.C. And this man is Colonel Bill Coleman. He was Chief of Public Information for the United States Air Force from 1969 to 1974.
It was here at the Pentagon that the Defense Department first became interested in the UFO phenomenon. This occurred in the late 1940s. with reports about objects and lights seen in the sky by military personnel and others. The Air Force decided to investigate the matter anyway. There was that one possibility that these flying objects could well be foreign weapons used for test purposes and might affect our national security. The investigative branch was called Project Sign. The project had only been underway for about 2 weeks when the Mantell crash had made headlines across the nation. The staff's investigation was far from complete, but public pressure was enormous, and they were forced to come up with an answer to really quiet growing speculation that Mantell had been killed by hostile aliens in some flying saucer. That's when we decided that Mantell had chased the planet Venus. However, this was an initial finding. The Chills and Whitted case had an impact on the Air Force project. It presented the first close-up account by highly reliable witnesses. The object described led some of the staff to postulate an extraterrestrial theory, and they wrote up an estimate of the situation, which at the time was classified top secret, suggesting that the saucers were from outer space. This theory was rejected by the Air Force Chief of Staff, General Hoyt Vandenberg, and even other Project Sign staff members as not having enough proof. So the extraterrestrial visitation idea was dropped for the time being.
It's been said in jest that if these UFOs are from other worlds and they wanted it to be known, all they'd have to do is land on the White House lawn. But an incredible incident, too quickly forgotten in time, took place over our Capitol. In 1952, Air Force spokesman for the Pentagon and UFOs at that time, Mr. Al Chop, relates the famous incident that stirred the Capitol, causing a request from even President Truman to be kept up to date on all the details.
There were radar reports of unidentified flying objects over the nation's capital. We had 3 reports. One came from Andrews Air Force Base radar control room, and 2 from the radar controls at Washington National Airport. The first sightings consisted of a number of unidentified targets picked up on radar. Then a call was placed from National to the Andrews Air Force Base flight controllers. They were apparently tracking the same targets. Then Andrews reported a visual observation of 3 objects that were apparently in the same position as those indicated by our radar sets. The targets stayed on radar until about 12:30 a.m. They moved slowly at first, about 100 to 200 miles per hour. Then one of the targets sped away at a fantastic rate of speed. It moved west from Andrews toward Riverdale. The estimated speed was 7,300 miles per hour. At this time, in the tower, we had about 7 targets on the radar scope. These unidentified objects were flying all over the city. They even violated the restricted air corridors here over the White House and over the Capitol building.
The phenomena wasn't to subside. The following Saturday night, July 26th, a repeat performance unsettles the Capitol again.
I was awakened the following Saturday night around midnight by a telephone call to my home in Virginia. It was the public information officer for the Federal Aviation Authority. He told me the air traffic control radars were again picking up a large number of UFOs over the Capitol area. First, they would follow a definite flight path, and then they would suddenly disappear. Others would come into view just as suddenly. I placed a phone call to the command post in the Pentagon, and I asked for an intercept. About 2:40 a.m., we got a radio call from a flight of F-94s, 2 aircraft in the flight. They also, at about that moment, appeared on our scope. And at that moment, a very frightening thing happened to us. All of our unknown traffic completely disappeared the moment those aircraft came on the scope. The flight leader called in and said, well, it doesn't look like we're going to do any good here, so we're going to go back to base. And at the very moment those aircraft disappeared, all of our unknown traffic appeared again on our scope. And again, it was a very frightening experience. We called Andrews Air Force Base, and they reported exactly the same thing happened to their scope.
10 a.m. on the morning after the sighting, General Landry, at the request of President Truman, called intelligence to find out what was happening over Washington.
It was the largest and longest press conference held in the Pentagon since World War II.
General Samford headed the conference and said that he was personally satisfied that the radar scope sightings were the result of temperature inversions, which are known and account for certain blips on radar. Although this was the conclusion of the Air Force investigations, interestingly enough, the actual report begins with this opening comment: a study of the various reports regarding the subject. Radar sightings do not allow a positive and final explanation to be made. The CIA now would enter the picture by convening a panel of top scientists to examine the UFO phenomena. The CIA's concern was that recent waves of sightings might constitute a threat to our national security. The thinking was that the enemy could exploit UFOs as a decoy in the preparation for an attack on the United States. 5 outstanding scientists and various Air Force and CIA representatives were to meet on Wednesday, January 14th, 1953. Among the panel members was one associate member who was destined to have more experience with the UFO phenomena than any other American scientist to date, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, astrophysicist and head of the astronomy department of Northwestern University.
I was called into the meeting on Thursday. The panel members were seated around this table. It was a rather somber and impressive occasion, actually. I was a junior member, and I remember feeling considerably nervous and apprehensive about being in front of this powerhouse of scientists. But then for the past 4 years, I had been scientific advisor to the U.S. Air Force on this very problem. There were 2 films that were of particular interest to the panel at that time. One was a film taken by a Navy officer while on vacation in Utah, near Tremonton, Utah, and the other was a film taken in Great Falls, Montana, by the owner of the local baseball team. The Utah film had already been subjected to some 1,000 or so man-hours of analysis by the Navy's Photographic Interpretation Laboratory. So the panel got up from their chairs and crouched around the wall to examine the films, and they asked to have the films run several times, as a matter of fact. Now, the Navy had, on the basis of their detailed analysis of the Utah films, they had concluded that the objects shown in the films could not be birds, balloons, aircraft, and so forth, but indeed that they were self-luminous, unidentified objects. Despite this conclusion, the panel rejected it and concluded that the objects were birds. They couldn't be unidentified, therefore they had to be birds. I came away from the meeting and from the room with the distinct feeling, however, that the panel had deliberately moved to debunk the whole subject and not to give it the serious scientific attention which it deserved.
How many times have you noticed something in the sky, something out of the ordinary, a movement or shape that suddenly catches your attention? You look more closely, and usually the thing becomes immediately recognizable. It's the moon, or a flock of birds, or a plane, usually. But just for a moment, suppose the thing you glimpsed remains unrecognizable, unidentified, without witness or proof. All you have left is a nagging sense of mystery, of uncertainty. A few years ago, this man had such an encounter near San Francisco, only he had proof in the form of an 8mm movie. But through an unsettling series of circumstances involving the United States Air Force, he remains today uncertain about exactly what he saw.
It was in August 1965. My family and I were invited to some friend's house near San Francisco. I remember it was a beautiful, clear day. We were driving for a while, and as a matter of fact, I recall looking at my watch, and it was around noontime. We continued driving, and I noticed at the distance something very bright. I was observing this for a few moments, and it appeared